B'Shuschem, Chashuv B'nei Yeshiva. It's always overwhelming to come back to a Makom Torah, a Beis Medrash where you spent so many years. B'Dal Ramos Shel Halacha. It's a humbling experience to be here, and I appreciate you affording me the opportunity to share some Divrei Hasayrus. I'm sure, like many of you, I myself had the question of why I'm here to give insight, perspective on a question which is Dvarim Sha'imdim Berumay Shel Olam, the major questions that people consider at this stage of life in a yeshiva which is replete with Gedolei Olam, Talmidei Chachamim. There's definitely no shortage of perspective, of advice, but I take solace in the fact that an outsider always has a unique perspective. Yisro was able to introduce, innovate in a way that all the Chachmei Yisrael, Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't able to see. So sometimes when you're immersed in a place, it's good to hear a perspective from a person that's outside, especially a topic like this, discussing the future, important decisions that you'll be making in terms of the course of your life. Often we don't appreciate the privileges. We don't appreciate the most important, the most beautiful privileges we have until we no longer have them. So I hope that by adding a little bit of my perspective, my experiences and those experiences that I encounter on a daily basis, perhaps there will be some value added. Rabbi Leibowitz asked me to speak about the beauty of a life in Avodas HaKodesh. The beauty of a life, as Rav Kook put it, of being an Eved La'am Hashem. And to speak about that even those that aren't going to enter Avodas HaKodesh, the importance of setting a year or two to take a year off, perhaps before entering the workforce, to be totally immersed in Limud HaTorah. And to be honest with you, at first I was a bit puzzled, I was a bit stumped. These seemed like two totally separate topics. One's addressing people that are considering a life of Melechas HaKodesh, and one's discussing people that are going to go out to the workforce and to try to discuss the advantages of taking years off to learn. So it was a little bit of a puzzle to me how to conquer both of these topics. But as I reflected, I realized that my confusion comes from a basic mistake in perspective. It's a mistake that we all too often make, that our society makes. It's a flaw that leads, and as I'll mention, as I'll discuss and describe, to, I believe, tragic mistakes that greatly impact the lives, our lives and the lives of our families, Be'ezus Hashem. And that is this notion that there are those that enter Meleches HaKodesh, Avodas HaKodesh, and there are those that don't. This was an insight that really hit the core by a beautifully stunning observation that Rav Pinkus made. Sometimes you see something that's so absolutely simple, but it shakes you to the core, a life-altering idea. And Rav Pinkus commented on the notion that we refer to as Bittul Torah. We're all trained since a very young age that one of the greatest Averis a person could commit is Bittul Torah. The Zohar HaKadosh says Bittul Torah is the reason for the Arichos of the Galus. Bittul Torah, the Gemara says, brings to Biza Ucherev Ba'olam. Bittul Torah, the Gemara says, is of the greatest Chatoim that Klal Yisrael could be guilty, and Rav Pinkus wonders. Isn't it a bit strange that we refer to this as Bittul Torah? If I were to ask you to describe Bittul Torah, I think most of us would say that we're wasting our time, we're being mevatel zman. We're not being mevatel Torah, we're wasting our time. The Torah is just fine. It's time that we were given as a matana from the Rebbeinu Shalom that we're wasting. But Chazal b'Chochmasam, says Rav Pinkus, is saying, no, this is Bittul Torah. And Bittul Torah is not the same as Bittul Zman. Bittul Zman is an egregious chet as well. But Oirech HaGolus, the length of the Golus, is not because we waste time, it's because we're mevatel Torah. And what Bittul Torah means, says Rav Pinkus, is pshutoy k'mashmo. It means that there's a chelek of Torah that is going to be bottled. That there's a chelek of Torah that's prescribed to every single Jewish neshama. And his task, his avodas hakodesh, his meleches hakodesh, his tafkid in this world is to develop that chelek of Torah. And I'm using the term Torah liberally, to be marbek k'vod shemayim in his specific way. That's his avodas hakodesh, that's his tafkid. And when that tafkid is not realized, says Rav Pinkus, you're not merely being mevatel zman, you're being mevatel the Torah. There's a chelek of the Torah that's bottled, that's not being developed, that's not being brought to fruition. There's an area of k'vod shemayim that has to be developed, and the Rebbeinu Shalom put you here to develop it, to expose it, to bring its light to the world, and you're being mevatel the Torah. Says the Zohar HaKadosh, mipnei bittul Torah the Oirech HaGolus. Because the k'vod shemayim that we ought to bring out, still being hidden, still covered. We each have a meleches hakodesh. We each have an avodas hakodesh. It was what the Goin tells us was given to us b'mei imai, as we were in utero. And Chazal tell us we were taught kol Torah kula. Says the Goin, it doesn't mean kol Torah kula, it means Torah delay. There's a tafkid, there's a chelek of Torah that you were assigned to. That the Rebbeinu Shalom assigned specifically to your neshama to develop. That's your chelek of Torah, that's your avodas hakodesh, that's your meleches hakodesh, and your tafkid, your purpose in this world. Choivosoi ba'olama is to develop that area of k'vod shemayim. We're all in meleches hakodesh. We're all in avodas hakodesh. There are those that will make a parnasa from that as well. And there are those that will have a greater challenge, trying to integrate that avodas hakodesh together with the profession. But all too often, the decisions we make in life are centered around the secondary rather than the primary. Centered around those areas of life which are meant to support and facilitate our avodas hakodesh, rather than trying to probe deeper into personality and try to understand what is my meleches hakodesh, what is my avodas hakodesh, what is my tafkid, what's choivasi ba'olami, and then try to figure out what's the best way to make a parnasa. All too often we go the opposite route. I look at my personality, I look at my situation, my circumstances, and I try to figure out what is the best way for me to make a parnasa. And then after everything has been put into place, now I try to squeeze Talmud Torah into it. Then I give some attention to Chayvasi Ba'ilami. Then I try to give some attention and try to fit it in. Nasa ha'ikr tafel ve'atafel ikr. Imagine if we were to begin our lives, adulthood, and first sit down and think, Ma chayvasi ba'ilami, what do I have to offer? What is my tafkid? What's my chelek in Torah? What's my avodas hakodesh? And then try to fit in everything else. How am I going to best accomplish that? How different our lives would look. But all too often, Rabbi say, the sequence is flipped. And it's a tragic mistake. It's a tragic mistake because all too often what I see almost on a weekly basis is people who have begun to ask this question much later in life. Ma chayvasi ba'olami. Now that my career is somewhat established, now that my life is somewhat on a trajectory, ma chayvasi ba'olami. But at that point, it's so hard to pivot. It's so hard to change. My career is already established. My lifestyle is the way it is. I chose where I'm going to live. I chose what my schedule is going to be. And now I have to squeeze everything in. Imagine if all those decisions revolved around the first question. What's my avodas hakodesh? What's my meleches hakodesh? But even more tragic is not when the question is asked late in life, but when the question is not asked at all. When an entire life is lived, the person never faced himself and asked this question, what's my meleches hakodesh? And this doesn't happen because people are bad. It doesn't happen because people are misguided. Sometimes I remember sitting here in yeshiva thinking, looking at different individuals, people that know better, and try to understand how do they live a life. It's so distant from the values that we believe, not being over isurim even. Just not focusing on what we know is important, what we know is valuable. An overemphasis on the physicalities and the luxuries of life, and you look at them, oh, they're misguided, they never had the time to appreciate what life's truly about. But Rabbi say it's not the case. This tragic mistake happens not because people don't know better. The words of the Meshech Chochmah, or great Meir Simcha, he points out something which is absolutely phenomenal. It's a well-known Meir Simcha, well-known Meshech Chochmah, but mostly for what I believe to be the most insignificant aspects. It's a Meshech Chochmah in Parshas B'chukos, I'm sure all of you have seen, where he prophetically describes the downfall of European Jewry. In that essay, Meir Simcha grapples and tackles a very important question. He's struggling with the vicious cycle that is Jewish history. Why does Jewish history continue to repeat itself again and again and again, the same cycle? We were thrown into Gullus, into a foreign country. We picked ourselves up. We climbed the ladder of society. We built yeshivas and batei knesiyos l'tifares. And then ultimately we begin to assimilate, and the Rebbeinu Shalom needs to throw us to another country, and we start the cycle over and over again. And Meir Simcha wonders, how do we break this cycle? It happened in Ashkenaz, it happened in Provence, it happened in Spain, it happened in Europe. the same cycle over and over again. What's going on over here? Why are we not learning from our mistakes? Where do we keep getting caught? Says Meir Simcha, I'll tell you the secret. A human being was created with a drive. He's created with a drive to accomplish, to make a difference, to innovate, to add value. It's an unquenchable thirst that we have to matter, to feel that we are accomplishing. This is the most basic human desire. We're willing to give everything up for this. It says Rav Meir Simcha, when we're thrown into a new country, Klal Yisrael, we're able to direct and funnel all of that energy to be mechadesh, the energy to build, the energy to create. We're able to direct it to Klal Yisrael and the Rebbeinu Shalom. Most of our grandparents, our great-grandparents came over from Europe, and they had to build yeshivas and batei knesiyos and mikvahs. They were building and building and building, and every person mattered. And every yeshiva was necessary. Every person had a tafkid, every person had a role, every person had an avodas hakodesh. Whether he was a rebbe, a rav, an accountant, it didn't matter. There was an avodas hakodesh for me. And then we develop further and further. And all of a sudden, the needs are less and fewer. There's no need for me. There's no room to innovate. What am I bringing to the table? Where am I going to satiate this thirst that I have, this hunger to make a difference, to matter? And Klal Yisrael has found all sorts of avenues, whether it be communism or socialism, says Rav Meir Simcha. Or perhaps in our dar, the way we indulge in luxuries and physical life fills that need for us. Gives us that sipuk hanefesh. So you have a person, and I see this often, Rabbi Isai, who has enough money, Baruch Hashem, to support himself and his children and grandchildren, Arbiyas Goyel Tzedek B'derech HaTeva. And he works with the same diligence, the same passion. And he's waking up early and he's traveling. And in his mind, it might be for the money. And to many of us, it might be for the money. But it's not the money. It's because that's where he feels he's adding value. That's what's giving him sipuk hanefesh. And when his Talmud Torah comes, it's that hour, he strolls into a daf yomi and he's entirely passive. Like every other person in the room. And he's certainly not quenching that thirst with his avodas Hashem. He does it as a sense of obligation. But it's not because he has the wrong values. It's not because he's misguided. It's not because he's bad. It's because he's a human being. And where he gets that cheshek for life, that ability to make a difference, to be mechadesh, to add value, that's where all his koiches are going to go. This is where Talmud Torah, Rachmana litzlan, takes a terrible hit. Because of what's providing us with our sipuk hanefesh, what's providing us with chiddush in life, is a certain movement in the time of Meir Simcha, but in our times, it's growth professionally. or perhaps amassing more wealth. It's an unsatiable thirst. It's a never-ending cycle. This is what Chazal mean when Shlomo HaMelech said, Oyev kesef lo yizbe kesef. A person who loves money will never have enough. Because what gives him the chiddush in life, the sipuk hanefesh, that which triggers his life, the passion of his life, has become kesef. And Chazal say, Oyev mitzvahs lo yizba mitzvahs, and Oyev chachma lo yizba chacham. If a person could redirect that passion, that chesed, that he's receiving that sipuk hanefesh from his avodas Hashem, if he looks at his life and asks, what's my meleches hakodesh? Not in what am I engaging in because out of a sense of obligation, I know I have to be koveya itim la Torah. But what's my purpose? The Rebbeinu Shalom created me for a reason. He gave me a tachlis. He gave me a chelik of Torah. There's an aspect of Torah, of Kvod Shamayim, that is dependent on my existence and my success. So that could drive a person. That for that a person will sacrifice a tremendous amount. It's hard. It's difficult. It takes sacrifice, whether you're talking about going into chinuch and rabbanos. There are tremendous sacrifices there. And we're talking about becoming a professional, but still having your firm understanding of your meleches hakodesh. There's also tremendous sacrifice, perhaps more sacrifice. But we're human beings, we love to sacrifice. As long as we feel that we're needed, that we matter. We're willing to sacrifice everything for what is our purpose. I had a great chus of being very close to Hagoyin HaGadol Reb Shlomo Fisher, one of the Ziknei Yerushalayim. I remember once when I was there, we were schmoozing with his Rebbetzin, and his Rebbetzin, Isha Tzedekis, had a large group of seminary girls there. We're talking about a woman who was moiser nafsha, kol nafsha, so her husband could sit and learn. A person who didn't leave yeshiva during the week from the moment after Sheva Brachas. He came home for Shabbos. That's the level of Mesiras Nefesh we're talking about. And she asked the seminary girls, who here is willing to be moiser nefesh, to be able to marry someone who's going to be a Talmid Chacham? And every single girl raised her hand. And she said, I don't recommend it for any of you. Because those of you that view it as a sacrifice, and rather than a privilege, you live your entire lives bitter. When it's my tafkid, when it's my purpose, when this is my meleches hakodesh, when this is my avodas hakodesh, it's not a sacrifice. It's why I'm here. It's my purpose in life. It's my tafkid. So I was very intrigued. Because I look around the world and I see that there are those that remain in touch with their avodas hakodesh, their meleches hakodesh. No matter where life is taking them, whether they're in chinuch and rabbanos, or whether they're professionals, they're able to be anchored to their meleches hakodesh. Their limud HaTorah, their engagement in the tzibur, it doesn't become something out of obligation, but it's something that they feel a sense of purpose. It's why they're living. It's what makes them tick. There are others, as we mentioned, that need to look elsewhere for other avenues to satiate that desire and that need. Nosati alibi. What's the difference? Why are some people able to do it and others unable? And I believe the answer is simple, Rabbi Say. So simple, I think it's mefurish in the Torah. See, we know that the Klal Yisrael had a very difficult time in the Midbar. Klal Yisrael in the Midbar was a downhill spiritual spiral. The Misoinim, the Asafsov, the Meraglim. But what began the whole spiral? What triggered everything? Where did it all begin? They were at Kabbalas HaTorah, at Matan Torah. What was the trigger that allowed for Klal Yisrael to continue to have these spiritual mishaps? So Chazal tell us, why is Vayehi ben Soya Orain right after Vayisum Har Sinai? Lahavsik ben Puranios lePuranios. The very first Puranios, the trigger for everything that occurred after that words, was Vayisu Kitina Kabireach mi Beis HaSefer. Haloi Dover, with the Dover Nifla. They ran from the Beis HaSefer. Sometimes we view children running out of school. We're talking about the Dardeya. They just received Kabbalas HaTorah. It doesn't seem that there was any reason for them to stick around. They were Mekabel Taryag Mitzvahs. And where were they running? They were running to Eretz HaKodesh, to Eretz Yisrael, to put those mitzvahs into practice. What was so egregious? What was so terrible? Ketina Kaberech mi Beis HaSefer. It cost them the Misoinim, the Asafsov, the Meraglim. Lenias Daiti. Chazal aren't saying that Ketina Kaberech mi Beis HaSefer was a punishment, was a chait, and they're being punished. Chazal, they're teaching us Darko Shel Torah. And Darko Shel Torah, the way that Torah is learned, is that we have tkufas, we have moments, we have periods in our life of Har Sinai. We have periods of our life where we're enveloped entirely in spiritual experience. And those moments were in utero, so to speak, where Chazal speak about the baby learning in utero, because this is Kachi Darka Shel Torah. A person has to have an incubator. He has to have a period of time where he's entirely engrossed, entirely enveloped in Kedusha, and then he's able to implement. Yaakov Avinu, before going out into love, based love, and he goes to Shem Ve'ever. Kachi Darka Shel Torah, there has to be these moments of incubation, these moments where you're entirely immersed, and then you receive all your nutrients, everything you need, then you're able to put them into practice. When a woman, Rahman al-Litzlan, the doctor is nervous that the baby's not going to stay in too long enough, so you go on bed rest because we need the baby to be there, needed to develop fully. So what Chazal are telling us is not a punishment, but Klal Yisrael needed to develop further. They were in utero, they were at Kabbalas HaTorah. They were immersed in the Hashros HaShechina of the Rebbeinu Shalom. And they left too early. They were born premature. That led to the Misoinim, the Safsov, and the Meraglim. This is why every action of Limud HaTorah, Chazal say, is connected to Har Sinai. Gemara says in Brachos, I'm supposed to learn be'ema, be'yira, be'reses, be'ziyah, just like Kemekabla Sinai. Why? Because the Sinai is the generator which fuels my entire life of Avodas HaKodesh, my entire life of Meleches HaKodesh is fueled by that moment, that experience in utero, where I became developed and able to put it into practice. If a person doesn't learn, it's Baskol Yoitzeis Mehar Choyre, because it means that you weren't in the womb for long enough. Lanias Daiti, it's clear. Those that are able to remain focused on their Meleches HaKodesh, on their avodas hakodesh. On the reason why the Rebbeinu Shalom put me in this world are those that had the experience of being entirely immersed. B'dalid koisli beis medrash. And the longer you're immersed, the more developed you are. Every year is much more than a year of learning. It's a year of development which will generate and fuel my entire life going forward. So yes, throughout my life, I'm not necessarily waking up thinking about a Rashba, thinking about a Rambam. But if I had that experience, if there were years where I was entirely shakua b'limud HaTorah, I was shakua in Har Sinai, in the Ashras HaShechina of Har Sinai, that I'm always able to revert back, to connect back. I know what it is. I spent the time trying to figure out what my Meleches HaKodesh is, what my mission in life is, what my purpose, what my tafkid is. And that remains a guiding force in my life. So I encourage all of you to first and foremost contemplate not only your koiches and nefesh in terms of what should be your source of parnasa, but first and foremost, understand yourselves in a deep way, trying to understand what it is that the Rebbeinu Shalom put me here for. What's my Meleches HaKodesh? What's my Avodas HaKodesh? You may find out that yes, maybe I do have the talents that it takes to be a Marbitz Torah, to enjoy that beautiful life of being able to uplift Klal Yisrael. Or perhaps your chelik of Torah is best accessed in a different way. But either way, appreciate the time of incubation. All too often we're running to the next stage of life, only to get there and realize, what did I give up on? There's no one that described this greater to me than the great Rabbi Dr. Abraham J. Twersky. If there's a person who lived his life with a mission of Avodas HaKodesh for Klal Yisrael, it was him. They found in one of his journals, all tshuva is personal. We all have our individual shortcomings and we each have our regrets. Writing about regret on Yom Kippur has brought to mind one significant regret. After my bar mitzvah, I studied in yeshiva in Chicago for several years. In 1946, my uncle, the Baba Rebbe, Reb Shlomo Halberstam, a Holocaust survivor, came to the United States and opened a small yeshiva in Manhattan, which I attended for 1 year. I have pleasant memories of that year. There are only 10 bachrim in the yeshiva. My chavrusa and I had a 6 a.m. shir, following which we went to the mikveh and then we davened. The Rebbe had breakfast together with the bachrim and his talks were very inspiring. We learned until lunch and had a 30-minute break and continued the next shir. After Mincha Mariv, we learned until 11. Everything was done on a small scale. What was so wonderful that we had the Rebbe all to ourselves. We didn't have to share him with thousands of Chassidim. The uniqueness of that year was that I was enveloped in an atmosphere of Kedusha 24/7. Even when we left yeshiva, there was no major interruption of Kedusha. So what is my regret? Dr. Abraham J. Twersky revolutionized the way we deal with addiction, saved countless lives. What is my regret? That I left that idyllic existence. I went to another yeshiva to prepare for smicha, but it was not the same. I was like an unborn child in the mother's womb, whose existence is idyllic, but must emerge to deal with the real world. Yes, I may have accomplishments and contributions in Yiddishkeit. Many people have told me that my books have brought them back to Torah, and countless people whom I treated for addiction have said that they owe their lives to me. I am grateful that I have been fortunate in that way, but I long for my idyllic existence, which I will never be so fortunate to experience again. Boisai, what you have over here is an idyllic existence. Let's not be ketina kabereach mi beis hasefer. Let's take advantage as much as possible to be in a makom of hashras hashchina, to be enveloped with kedusha. All the places that we're running and rushing to will certainly be more successful, having been in utero till completion. Be'ezus Hashem, with that time, we'll be able to identify our meleches HaKodesh, our unique avodas HaKodesh, that will remain a guiding light for all of us throughout our lives, bringing much nachas to the Rebbeinu Shalom and to all of Klal Yisrael. What's your name?
Ezra Stern. My grandfather is Reuven Davis.
Ah, very nice.
Like my whole family,
Okay, nice to meet you. Very good.
Take the mic.
Oh, sorry.
Sure.
You were recording it. You were recording it.
No, sure.
Okay?
I think